Hey everybody, it's Dr. Leith, and today I'm going to talk about intelligence testing. Let's dive in. All right, IQ testing. So how would you define intelligence? Really think about it. Is it just academic achievement, how far you went and the grades you have? Most of you are saying no, there's street smarts and book smarts. What about your ability to reason or navigate situations? Or relational intelligence, emotional intelligence? There are many different concepts about intelligence, and there are many different traits, just like with personality. It's really exciting. And the very first concepts about intelligence testing were very limited, right? Initially, this guy named Spearman, which I know that sounds super professorial of me, this guy named Spearman. Spearman said there were he came up with a two-factor model. There's general intelligence, right? How you move through life and decision-making, and there's specific intelligence. Math, literacy, logic, so on. However, this early concept did not account for if things change. It was very much, this is what you have, end of story. But he was onto something with the general and specific thing. So this is what his model would look like. Here's your IQ, right, your general intelligence, and then here are the different traits. Cattell, who is a name that you will hear often if you continue to research intelligence, he came up with this concept of fluid and crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence, he said, was more innate and more biological, not as influenced by culture, and it includes things like your memory, processing speed, perception, your ability to learn language, right? It's just something that a person has. Right? Some people have very good long-term memory, some people have very good short-term memory, some people have less visual, spatial ability, and so on. It's fluid. Crystallized intelligence is dependent on exposure. So the example I give is like nobody knows tax law, right? Nobody just like is born and is like, yes, I am gifted with tax law. You have to be exposed to it. You have to learn it, right? This is not the ability to learn as much as it is the actual knowledge of those things. So his model looked like, here's your general intelligence, and it's made of fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. They picked G to represent intelligence. I don't really know, maybe because there's a G in it. Then we have the current model, or the one that comes up the most, Cattell-Horn-Carroll, or CHC. This is the same as before, except now it's expanded quite a bit to include those specific aspects of intelligence. So not just fluid or crystallized, but now looking at processing speed, memory, arithmetic ability, reading, and so on. And more recent concepts look at how all these different aspects relate to one another. So this is how it would look like. We have our general intelligence, our IQ, crystallized, fluid, verbal, reading, short-term memory, processing speed, and so on. All these different ones. And it doesn't stop there, right? There's many more, and they're always coming up with different aspects or ways of defining aspects and different ways of measuring them. So, all that to say, lots of different models. The general consensus, the thing that we can take away is that there is a general intelligence, your IQ, and that is comprised of different aspects of intelligence. And that's why with the learning disabilities, or if we wonder if someone's gifted, or wonder if someone has intellectual disability, to make sure, is it across the board all the aspects, or is it a specific thing that's causing a problem? Does this person really have an issue with math, or is it that they have a processing speed problem or a short-term memory problem and have a hard time keeping track of details? So how does one become intelligent? Well, intelligence scales up with age, assuming normal human development. So as a child, typically we're less intelligent than adults most of the time. And as someone grows older, based on human development, experience, and exposure, you start to develop intelligence. So think about the way children see the world at different ages and stages based on the different human development models. All areas of intelligence grow based on experience and exposure. So when you go to school, you're being exposed to facts and information, and you're learning it. You're learning how to add, subtract, multiply. You're learning historical facts and the rules of living in a society. You're learning language rules and things like that. But you're also learning based on your interaction with your peers, right? I learned that when I raise my voice, I get more attention. I learned that if I break a promise, then that person gets upset. And so it's both lived experiences and those academic and professional experiences. And that's where you wind up with somebody who there can be combinations of people who had superior world-class education but cannot make a good decision to save their life. And then you have people who they maybe didn't do well in school and for one reason or another did not reach a lot of academic achievement, but are still very capable and are superior in making conversation and navigating the world based on their non-academic experiences. So in short, academic achievement alone does not make a person intelligent. It is also comprised of social interactions, relationships, your emotion. All those lived things go together to form intelligence. And there's that innate stuff, like your innate ability to understand how numbers work, to learn memory, or to learn vocabulary, to have a good memory. So why do you think we would test for intelligence? And again, this is not the same as an achievement test where we're giving a test to see, did you master the content from chapters 1 through 4? It's not like a midterm. We're testing all these different aspects of intelligence. Well, you answered correctly. After a robust discussion, we test to develop hypotheses, identify strengths and limitations, very important, to predict academic performance or come reasonably close, for diagnosis reasons, to determine disability status, and to determine the extent of damage caused by head injury. So, for treatment purposes, we might give an IQ test. That helps us figure out where there might be a problem. And that can help us come up with educational plans and enhancements and arrangements for students. It helps us identify strengths and limitations, right? So think of a child that's struggling in school. It will help us understand, is this a skill or a will problem? Just like with personality, there's trait and state. With intelligence, you have skill and will. Skill means the student does or does not have the knowledge to do the work. So, the child is struggling in history, right? I remember taking history when I was, in high school, in middle school, and oh God, it was so boring. Very difficult. Is it that the child maybe lacks long-term memory skill, or there's a reading difficulty that's preventing that knowledge? Or is it a will problem where it's just like, this guy is so boring, I cannot focus, right? I don't want to do it. So is it a willpower issue, or is it that they lack the skill? Is there a comprehension problem? It'll also tell us if there's another diagnosis. For example, if a child had ADHD and we gave an IQ test, it would totally manifest, because some of those IQ tests require sustained attention and things like that. In short, it helps us identify where is a strength and where's a limitation. We'd also see, hey, this child did really, really well with processing speed, right? Where they're given a couple minutes to see how many red triangles are on this page. They did really well, knocked it out of the park, so they can work very quickly. And it also tells us that there's a limitation, right? He had a very difficult time with number work, for example. So with that, we can kind of take advantage of strengths and play off of them. And if there's a deficit somewhere, what is the magnitude of the deficit and how can we help correct for it? And this would not be relevant just to children in an academic situation. Survivors of traumatic brain injuries, it helps us, one, understand the extent of the damage and where the damage is done. Prediction of academic performance, I say take this with a grain of salt. It can indicate cognitive impairment, and if there is cognitive impairment, we would expect that to manifest in academic achievement. But in theory, we always kind of assume someone with a high IQ might do well academically. Socially, relationally, outside of academics, that link is not made. It doesn't say one way or the other. Diagnosis. To diagnose intellectual disability disorder, what was formerly known as mental retardation, you have to administer an IQ test. And a score... Oh boy, Siri's jumping in on the conversation. A score of 70 or lower would indicate intellectual disability. As you recall from the IQ lectures with scales and all of that, IQ tests have a mean of 100 and a standard deviation of 15. So a score of 70 would put you 2 standard deviations below the mean and into the second percentile, meaning that 98% of other same age test takers scored higher. We might also use an IQ test or versions of an IQ test to diagnose specific learning disorders, right? Dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia. Determining the extent of damage caused by head injuries, right? So someone had a head injury, it helps us figure out where that damage is, where a limitation might occur and to what degree. Some limitations, though, about intelligence testing is that there's a questionable link to intervention. So I've seen this firsthand where a student went for one reason or another and got tested for IQ or to test their IQ, and then it's kind of like, well, what do you do with it? Like, you know it, what can we do? Now, more often than not, if someone is getting an intelligence test, it means that there is an impairment. Intelligence testing is very laborious, it's very time intensive, it's very energy intensive on the client and on the counselor's part. They're very expensive. So this is not something that someone just does out of curiosity. So if there is a problem where there is a deficit, that's good to know because then you can make accommodations. So for example, if they're at a K through 12 setting or if they're at a college setting, then they can get appropriate accommodations. If it's below average but not in that intellectual disability thing, then what do we do with it, if anything? We might change educational approaches, but it doesn't tell us what to do. There's a potential for misuse and misinterpretation. They are very complex to use and interpret. And so one little misstep and the scores are all off, right? So everything has to be done according to procedure. This is not a big deal as long as you are well versed with the steps and the manual and what you need to do to give the IQ. But this is not one that you just sort of spur of the moment do. This is one that you need to kind of prepare for and make sure that you are following the very rigid procedures to give an intelligence test. Limited scope of abilities. This does not measure everything, right? And you also have to take into account cultural considerations and age and stage development. So some of the issues in intelligence testing and fun dinner time conversation. Is intelligence stable over time? It grows. It scales up as you get older, but at a certain point, it kind of levels off. Your fluid intelligence, in theory, is kind of locked, right? Your ability to acquire new knowledge stays the same. Now, your vocabulary and your factual knowledge may continue to grow. What do intelligence scores predict, if anything? Is intelligence hereditary? This isn't a fun question. It's not just limited to genetics, but think if you had very academic parents or very intellectual parents, no, I don't mean like scored high on IQ, but people who they have tons and tons of books and they value academic achievement, they might be pushing the child to do it. So it's less that it's genetic or hereditary and more that it was supported in the household, right? What environmental factors influence intelligence? Well, the biggest one is the access to information, right? Now we all have phones. We can look stuff up. You can Google random facts, right? And so now I know that otters mate for life, right? I didn't know that yesterday. So access to information, better education, and then on the flip side, in school districts where there's less affluence, not having up-to-date material, books, supplies, and stuff like that can hinder academic achievement, which would manifest, unfortunately, in an IQ test. Are there group differences in intelligence, like men and women? Yes. Overall, no, right? Overall IQ, no. In specific aspects, yes, right? So visual spatial is higher in men, whereas memory is greater in women. And then a really cool thing is the Flynn effect. What is the Flynn effect? Well, it's the tendency for IQ scores to go up over time in terms of society, meaning that every so many years we see an average increase in 5 points in IQ. So, and part of that is due to having access to education and knowledge all the time, because we can look stuff up. So we have to renorm it, meaning if we took the IQ test from like 20 years ago, we would all probably score much higher than if we took a present day IQ test. Here's a list of the most commonly used intelligence tests. The Wechsler is the big one, the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, the Kaufman Scale, Woodcock-Johnson, Stanford-Binet, the Reynolds. If you take the advanced assessment, we used to have people administer this, so we go much more into depth. I would love to show you pieces of the intelligence test, but as you'll recall from early on, we have to worry about test security, so I can't make a video where I'm like, hey, here's how to administer an IQ test. But they're pretty cool. Hopefully when things get back to the way they were, if you'd like to see one, let me know and we can see if we can't figure a time out later on where we can meet in person when it's easier to do so and we can look at those. That's going to do it for today with intelligence testing. I hope everybody's well. Check out the readings on Blackboard, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.